Hey everyone. In feeding off of our popular video about 𝐥𝐞𝐿 versus the witches, I decided I'd really delve into the world of witches. Do they exist? What's the deal with them? Why are they always construed as evil? And so that led me, of course, into the world of pagan religions, and there's a lot of them, but specifically to the belief system known as Wiccan. And because there's a lot of conflicting information on it, I decided to speak to somebody that has moved in that world. So, what you're about to watch is a very candid conversation with my friend, uh, Kitty the Atheist, who is now an atheist, but for many years was a practicing witch in Wiccan. So, I thought you would enjoy it. Let's dive in.
Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Re, re. Thanks, everyone. Everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today, I've got a really special treat for you guys. I got my good friend, Kitty the Atheist, here. She's going to tell us a little bit about the Wiccan religion or the Wiccan belief system, as well as pagan belief systems in general. As you know, I promised you a video on that. There's so much information, and I'm pretty sure a lot of it is not correct. So I figured I would just talk to somebody that has moved in that world. And Kitty, welcome, and tell us yourself.
Hi. Yeah. So my name's Kitty, and I have been like Christian, and then I became a pagan. I was more in the Wicca sphere of influence, and that is one thing about paganism is like there's a lot of different subcategories. It's like if you think about all the different types of Christians there are, there's that many or more types of pagans, and even among the same umbrella, like even among Wiccans, you would have disparities depending on which pantheon people would pray or offer ritual or sacrifice. And I don't mean sacrifice like not actually sacrificing animals or anything like that. Like that's a complete misconception. But sacrifice like wine or herbs, like more ritualistic stuff that doesn't require hurting any living thing. Well, I mean, I guess burning herbs and burning incense technically is a living thing, but you give reverence for it like when you are making said incense. And again, like there's many different subcategories, and me as a solitary practitioner for about, I'd say 10 years or so, from when I left Christianity at a young age until my early 20s. And I did do the whole coven thing for a hot minute, but I just didn't feel at right, you know, because there was a lot of clashing of different people having like different beliefs and things that just didn't mesh well with me. So I pretty much just stuck with the whole solitary practitioner thing. Which that is actually pretty common. You'll find a lot more kitchen witches or solitary practitioners, at least in my experience, than you would covens. But again, that's just in my little corner of Wicca. And there are people, in the overall community that have more info and experience with things like Norse pagan or like pagan, like heathenry kind of thing. Like that's a whole separate subcategory from where I was, where it was basically just nature worship and spells and incense and essentially prayer. I mean, that's what spells are. It's enhanced prayer.
So basically what you're saying is that when you take the word pagan,
Mhm.
that is really just anything that represents outside of universally accepted religions.
I mean, kind of. It's like when you say the word Christian, do you
Right.
mean Mormon? Do you mean Pentecostal, evangelical, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic? You know, there's really so many different types, and again, like it's a huge spectrum, and Wiccans can, we kind of borrow from different things. Like Wicca itself as a religion was really only established in around the 1960s, where it was basically kind of a revival of like older like neo-pagan beliefs, and it was just kind of coalesced into one thing. And the thing I liked most about Wicca, besides the fact that there's a lot of female empowerment to it, because instead of having like a creator god, it's a creator goddess. She created the universe, and then she created the god, as her consort. Like there's multiple deities, but then like the main creator goddess in Wicca, she literally danced across the void to create the heavens. It's actually a really pretty story.
Wow.
And she created the goddess, her consort, and then she basically ruled the heavens, he ruled the earth, kind of thing. And so I don't know, my angsty little teenage heart appreciated that. And there's also a lot of nature worship, a lot of reverence for nature, and all of like the magics and spells and everything. It has to do with color and essential oils and herbs. So things that you would find in your kitchen would be the same things you'd be using for spells. And there were even exorcisms. If you thought you had bad spirits, you would burn white sage. And you would literally use a sage smudge stick, burning that throughout the house, because sage is believed to be something that makes negative energies uncomfortable. It cleanses negative energies. Which was something I would do whenever I went to a new place. I would smudge it out because I didn't want any negative energies in my little area of domain. But yeah, like kitchen witch is something you hear a lot in Wicca, because it's basically just solitary practitioners that they have their herb gardens, they have their herbs. You might, if you're having bad dreams, you might make a little satchel with some sage and some lavender and just tuck it under your pillow after, like, essentially, you might anoint it with oil or moon water, and then do essentially a spell, which again it's not too dissimilar to prayer. It's just, rather than necessarily asking a deity to make something happen, you are doing a ritual that invokes the deity to allow you that extra oomph to manifest that yourself. So there's that. The other thing of Wicca is, the number one tenet of Wicca is do what ye will, harm none. So basically, you are free to do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting other people. And like that was something that really resonated with me, because I think that we should have those types of personal freedoms, that you should be able to do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody else. So it's like, if like if I want to sleep naked, for example, that's not hurting anybody. I should be free to do that. But there have been people I've known in other religious groups, Christians, that would say that that is taboo, that is like, that's just, no, that's shocking, that's terrible, you should never do that. Or it's like premarital sex. Wiccans don't give a shit about premarital sex. As long as it's consensual, no fucks given. They don't care who or how many you're sleeping with, because again, as long as it's all above board, consenting adults, then nobody cares, because you're following the tenet of Wicca. You're doing what you want, but you're not hurting anybody. So There's a lot of freedom there, but
So
also a lot of, oh, sorry.
no, I was just saying, is there like in Christianity, there's the Great Commission, go out and preach the gospel to all the world. Is there something similar to that in Wiccan, or is
No.
it just kind of one that if you find it, great, you're welcome?
Yeah. No, there is no proselytizing in Wicca. At least not that I've ever experienced. I'm sure you're always going to find that one person because everybody sees things their own way. But in my experience, I've not dealt with any proselytizing in Wicca. I mean, sure, you might say have someone ask you questions and you might answer those questions and then say, oh hey, we're having this little like witchy meetup, would you like to come? But it's not trying to convert them. It's more just, it's open, like it's light and bright. And Wiccans are considered like the more white witches, like, because along with that harm none, they also believe in the rule of three, that what you send out you get back threefold. So they don't usually tend to deal in like curses and hexes and things like that, because say you curse somebody to lose their job, then you might have that backfire on you where you end up losing not only your job but also your house, kind of thing. Like, I mean, that's like oversimplification, but it is very much they believe that anything you're sending out in the universe, you're going to get back threefold. So you want to be sending out at worst neutral stuff so that neutral comes back, but you want to be sending out more good because you want to get that good in return. So it's not like you have to do good deeds. It's more like there's like that invent like backfire effect if you don't do good things. But there is no hell belief. Like they don't believe in hell. They don't believe in demons or anything. But there is reincarnation, and basically like when you die, your spirit essentially would go to like Summerland, which is where you basically wait to be reincarnated. And then there's subsets of beliefs, like one that I ascribed to personally was that if you were neutral or good, you went to the Summerland. If you were not so good, like, say killers and stuff like that, that's where your evil spirits came from, because they weren't permitted into the Summerland to continue the cycle of rebirth. And so, kind of forced to wander bodiless, and like that's where like a lot of those negative energies came from. And I'm not the only one that believe that. I'm not exactly sure how common of a belief that is, because again, like, it is a very big tent, it is a very large umbrella, and I can really only speak to my experience with Wicca. But the big ones that are across the whole thing is that it is any magic done is white magic. You don't do spells on people, even if they're good spells, without their permission, without consent. So even if you have a friend that's been plagued by night terrors, you're not going to do a spell to give them pleasant dreams without their permission, because that would be considered, gray magic. Not bad magic, because it's still a good spell, but it would still be considered a bad thing to do, because consent matters. Because if you're violating someone's consent, you're doing them harm, even if the action you're taking that is harmful is a good one. Because again, consent matters, and that first rule, do what you will, harm none, and violating consent is harming.
So in that kind of paradigm that that Wiccans walk in, so let's say someone is hurting someone else, so instead of putting a bad spell on the person that's doing the hurting, you might cast a spell of protection over the one that's being hurt, if they give you their permission.
Right. The closest that you would get, and I think, and again, this is a gray area, the closest that I would see would maybe be a binding spell against the aggressor, where it's not like a curse, but it's more like just trying to prevent those negative energies, like from coming out of them. So it's like trying to prevent harm. So you would do a protection charm on the victim, and then you might, and not all would do it, because again, you're not getting consent for this, do a binding spell on the attacker. It's a non-harmful spell. So it wouldn't be, you know, under the negative. But again, without that consent, it's a gray area of magic. And some would say yes, it would be okay to do it because they are an aggressor and it's just another layer of protection for the person being harmed. And others would say, nope, you can't do it because you don't have consent. So again, like that one would be a gray area, and that's about the only time that I've really seen because that situation actually I did know of with some of my other witch friends, and we had a very long conversation on exactly that of do we do a binding spell on this person, because a binding spell is not going to cause you harm, and it's very amorphous in like what a binding spell actually does, but it's more about just kind of like tamping down on all those toxic negative energies so that they're not leaching out, because like them leaching out is what's causing the harm to the other person. You know, it's like their temper is flaring up, so it's kind of like tamp down on their temper, tamp down on those like violent outbursts, um, which again would be a positive thing for someone who's having those types of outbursts, but without consent. And it was a debate. Like there was a lot of back and forth that happened there, because, and I mean, I could see it from both sides. I really could, you know, doing a binding spell to, you know, essentially try to prevent more harm being done. I get it. But then, you know, also not wanting to do magic on someone that has not asked for it, you know. But then people were like, well, I mean, they're
Right.
they're abusing somebody, so at that point, you know, like they've kind of lost the right to say no because they are actually actively harming somebody. And it was a huge back and forth. Like whenever you have a group of people, even when they have similar beliefs, you're going to have disagreements about
Oh yeah.
any number of things. And Wiccans are no different. But a lot of people think, oh, Wicca, it's witchcraft, which it is. You know, they do practice magic, um, but again, that is essentially just prayer with extra steps. That's really what it boils down to. You know, making an altar, burning offerings. It's actually closer to what like early Christianity and Judaism was, because like they burned sage, or well, not necessarily sage, but incense and offerings, and they had altars and so on. So in a way, going from Catholicism to Wicca was kind of not hard, because there's a lot of like ritualism in Catholicism as well, you know, with incense and the ash on your forehead, and, you know, lots of chanting, and droll songs that sound very depressing. Honestly, Catholic masses are incredibly depressing. But
Oh my goodness.
it's
Well,
true.
well, you said Wiccan was a fairly, and it's pretty much a baby religion as far
Yes.
as that goes, having been established in the 1960s. Is that it was that in the United States, or did it come from maybe, Great Britain?
I believe it was the United States. It's been a while since I brushed up on my Wiccan history. Like I said, it's been 10
Mhm.
years since I was actively practicing. I still wear my pentagram, you know, because it has meaning to me, even though I don't believe in any of it anymore. I don't believe spells actually work any more than just, you know, power of positive thinking might affect change in your life, or coincidences, you know. But I do still love the smell of sage, so I will
Oh yeah.
occasionally burn it, you know. But not because I think it's doing anything other than just uplifting my own spirits, because it's a relaxing smell to me. Um, but it was basically Wicca started, essentially they were taking from older pagan traditions and kind of coalescing it into its own little niche like group, and that's where, you know, the tenets of Wicca came in, and where it really started getting a resurgence of seeing neo-pagans, you know, in the US and around the world. Honestly, I mean, there have been pagans like longer than there have been Christians. Like there's always
Oh
been
yeah.
pagans, but after the Christian Crusades, a lot of the pagan religions, like their groups, their numbers were much, much smaller, because, you know, convert or die will definitely have an impact on the beliefs of the local populace.
Oh, absolutely. So, it might have had its roots in, like, the Druids or other Celtic type
It
religions,
pulled
and
from
the
a lot
just
of different,
Is it, you said there was a like a mother goddess. Is she like represented by nature, or is she somewhere up in the ether, or is she kind of all around us? How does that
It's
work?
kind of an all around you thing, and I just looked it up. It was actually England. It was Wicca.
England.
Wicca was developed during the first half of the 20th century in England, and it was introduced to the public in 1954 by Gerald Gardner. And he basically, there's no central authority figure in Wicca. Like there's no Wiccan pope or priest, and in fact there really aren't even many Wiccan churches. I believe there was one a while ago, but then it kind of closed down. I mean, there might be, but last I heard there really weren't any. And it's mostly done in people's homes, or maybe, in a community center on the weekend, or out in nature. A lot of things take place out in nature. Now, one rumor that people might believe about Wiccan ritual is dancing naked under the moonlight. And there are actually Wiccan groups that do skyclad rituals, where you basically are doing your rituals naked in the woods. And again, it falls under the do what you will, harm none. Being naked is not hurting anybody. So
No, my only imagery of witches, of course, come from the movies. The Craft was, totally one of the best movies ever. I'm sure
fucking
it
love that
really is not a
movie.
good representation of
It's
Wiccan.
not,
And
but
then
it's so good. Like honestly, like one of the first Kevins I was in, we would have sleepovers and watch that movie. So don't feel bad for loving it. Even Wiccans I know love that movie. Faruka Balk is just
but before that, it was always witches were associated with evil. Like the Witch is one of the more recent movies, and it does do that that she finds the witches dancing naked in the forest before she realizes that the entire reason her family was slaughtered supernaturally is because Satan wanted her for his coven, and now she's being lured into the dancing in the end. So I think I kind of already know where this will go, but why do they get that kind of reputation? Because the few that
because
I've met, they're usually really nice people.
no, honestly, it comes down to men wanting power and control over women and scapegoating women. I mean, even in the Salem witch trials, some, men were burned too, but the
Yeah.
majority of the victims were women that one of them was a widowed woman who she actually inherited, some property or whatever from her deceased husband, and somebody else wanted that property. Accuse her of witchcraft, and there
Wow.
you go. You can steal that property. Or you got the oddball, like eccentric woman in town that you don't like looking at, who's like a beggar woman, accuse her of witchcraft, and there you go. A lot of it comes down to, fear and methods of control. The church used whatever methods of control they had, and fear is an excellent motivator. If there's a problem with the crops, rather than understanding that, oh, we didn't have a lot of rains in the rainy season, or we didn't have a good snow melt this year, so that's why the crops aren't doing so well. It's, oh, it must be witches cavorted with the devil. So it very much comes down to
Absolutely.
just controlling people. And unfortunately, women, and again, some men as well, were the scapegoats for that.
Got it.
Same thing in Europe. If there was a plague, or if livestock were dying, or again, bad harvests, droughts, all of those were blamed on women. And in that time, women really didn't have much power. They were essentially, the bottom rung of society that was still considered a person, because, below them would be the slaves, the enslaved peoples, or, and they were not considered people. Women were more property, but, they were still more of a person than a slave would have been. And so a married woman, as long as she is pious and obedient to her husband, et cetera, she was not likely to be accused of witchcraft unless the husband wanted to divorce her, or if the husband had his eye on another fair lass and didn't want to deal with the ramifications of divorce, which was incredibly frowned upon, other than cases of adultery where, you know, you just stone your wife to death and there you go, problem solved.
Exactly. I did a like video on the sources for what we know for the historical sources for Count Dracula. Of course, one was Vlad the Impaler, the other was
Black Savage.
Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. And
Oh,
as
yeah.
I dug into her story, it came out that a lot of the stuff she was accused for was very speculative at best. And it all stemmed from the fact that another monarch owed her what would be millions of dollars in today's money and didn't want to pay it. So if she's accused of murder and, you know, put
And
on house
witchcraft
arrest,
and
he doesn't
cavorting
have to
with
pay it.
demons.
Yeah,
Exactly.
he doesn't have to pay her back.
Like I said, I mean, a slave, you could just kill a slave and then pay a fine for damaging property because slaves were actual property at the time.
Right.
Women, again, they were kind of straddling that line between property and person.
Uh-huh.
They leaned a little more towards person than property, but they were still considered property. That's where dowries came in. And when, you know, you married a woman, you received your dowry, you were basically being paid. It was a transactional thing. You were being paid to take the woman out of the family, you know, and bring her into your own family. So it's a very misogynistic time period, and a lot of the issues that stem from that were, again, it was about control. In fact, there's um there's a YouTuber. Her name is Abby Cox. She is a
Uh,
historical costumer, and she has studied a lot in like just history in general. She actually did a video on the history of witchcraft and how the women were demonized. It's definitely something worth checking out. It was fascinating to watch. And her channel's just great anyway. You can watch her make historical
okay.
costumes talking about like not only corsets and stays, but her time when she worked at Colonial Williamsburg. So if you're interested in like history stuff at all, it's definitely a channel to check out. And that video especially, I will send you the link to it when we're done
And
here.
I'll link it right up here for everyone because I'm always about highlighting other people. And Kitty's own YouTube channel and TikTok, I will also link those either above or down below. So go check her
It's a
out.
hobby, you know,
But
I make stuff when I can, but I don't really have like any set release schedules or anything like that. It's when I feel inspired to do something, I do it because I've got other stuff
absolutely,
going on in life.
I understand. Uh, so there are men in Wicca,
Yes, there
and
absolutely
are they
are.
warlocks or are they witches or
I mean, some men will use that term, some won't. It's not really standardized. Like, you know, usually, like, just witch in general, like, works for both genders. But again, some prefer other terminology. Um, and one thing interesting about Wicca is it's not unlike some other paganisms that it pretty much sticks to one pantheon. So like Norse pagans are drawing from the Norse pantheon.
Hmm,
Wicca kind of dabbles in all of it. Like, and me, like I tend to stick with the Greek and Norse and Celtic pantheons. Like my patron goddess, like my favorite goddess to pray to when I was pagan, when I was Wiccan, was the Morrigan. And it's kind of a little bit of an homage to her in my background because she was a trinity
right.
goddess in Celtic lore, that she was basically war and like death and fertility. So like she had a large domain, and ravens were, you know, one of her patron animals. In fact, there's a story in Celtic mythology where essentially the Celtic version of Hercules or Heracles, Cuchulainn, like he was hit on by the Morrigan and he snubbed her and it didn't go well for him. Like, not only did she kill him, but she killed his best mate and his horse before she killed him. Now, she didn't
Okay, I
actually
draw the
do it.
line at the horse. I draw the
She,
line at the horse.
so, like, I believe she killed his best mate first, and then the horse, and then him. And as he's like dying from his wound, like she shows up to him, and he realized, like right before he died, that it was the Morgan who had like tried to court him, and he was like, "Well, fuck."
I'm one of those people, like I said, I'm true crime. I can watch anything. They kill the whole family. They kill the pet. I'm like, no.
Because
I don't
animals
know
are
why I'm like
innocent.
that. Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
honestly, animals are more innocent than people.
exactly.
They're at
And
least
so with,
honest.
oh yeah, never been betrayed by a dog. I'll just put it that way. Um, so most of the Wiccan ceremonies and stuff revolve around use of herbs and things that you would find in a kitchen. So there's no baby sacrifice, animal sacrifice. That's all
Nope.
lies perpetrated by the church and Hollywood and all that
Yeah,
good
people
stuff.
that don't know any better. Um, Again, like, herbs, like a lot of witches will, a lot of Wiccans will have their own little gardens, and the spells that they use regularly, or herbs that have multiple uses will be what you'll find in the garden, like rosemary and sage and lavender. Like, those are kind of staples. um and then you might find a jar of water that they will leave out under the full moon, like for X amount of time, to essentially absorb the energies of the full moon and then use that. um, some will use crystals and candle magic as well, where different colors mean different things. Like, a pink candle would be used for love, green would be for a spell for prosperity or wealth, um, and so on and so forth. It basically blended a bit of, like, color theory and color magic with candles. So yeah, herbs and candles and jars of oil and water are basically the main staples you'll find in a Wiccan's kitchen.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you're the tenets of Wiccan and the tenets of the Church of Satan, and I am not promoting anybody to join either of these because the Church of Satan is primarily atheists that are very theatrical. But I've done a couple of videos on those. But the tenets are remarkably the same. I mean, they similar. They are do no harm, do what you will, do no harm. When it comes, I mean, it spells it out. Only kill for protection, for self-defense, protection of a weaker person, or food. Meaning animals, of course. Do not, if you desire to be intimate with somebody, proceed in the mating ritual, the courtship ritual. If they say yes, proceed. If they don't, nothing without consent. I think it's awesome. I think all those tenets are quite awesome when you contrast it with a lot of the major Abrahamic religions that seem to be the most popular out there. It's very much one-sided.
Yeah, I mean,
And
in Christianity alone, if you are a woman and you are sexually assaulted, if they say you didn't scream loud enough, then you could be killed for it. Or if you froze,
yeah,
because that's one thing people don't understand. Like, it's not just fight or flight. The third option is freeze. And sometimes in those circumstances, the person will completely freeze, like a deer in
yeah.
headlights, and
Oh,
they
there's
can't
even a
control it.
passage in Leviticus where if two men are fighting and like one of them's wives tries to break them up and accidentally touches the genitals of the other man while doing that, that she can lose her hand. They can chop off her hand for it. I'm like, what the hell?
Also in Leviticus, if you are assaulted by a man and you are betrothed to another, then your damaged property, you'll be put to death. But if you're not betrothed, then the man who assaulted you has to pay your father and marry you and is not allowed to divorce you. So your choices are death or marrying
You're
essentially
rapist.
the person that raped you. Yes. Um, that's horrifying. That's absolutely horrifying.
Even widowers. I mean, if your husband dies and you have a and he had a brother. That brother is required to marry you and take care of you. Now, this is the Old Testament now, but so not only are you a widow, now you got to marry your brother-in-law, which you may not even like, know, or want to, but you got to.
I mean, well, and like a lot of people think that the Bible is like pro-life, but it actually takes an opposing stance, because if you actually look at it, like personhood isn't given to a fetus. Like a child is not considered alive until they take their first breath, and basically the breath of the Lord. Because if you attack a pregnant woman and she dies, then you're punished for killing that woman. If you attack a pregnant woman and she miscarries, then you just have to pay a fine for attacking her. It was basically, no different than loss of property. Like if you attacked your neighbor's slave and the slave died, then you had to compensate them for the lost property. It very much was, that like babies weren't, babies, they weren't considered people until they were born alive.
Exactly. And I believe, I forget what chapter and verse it is or what book it is, but there's actually instructions on inducing an abortion or giving an
The bitter
abortion.
waters. Yeah,
the bitter waters.
The bitter waters. If you suspect your wife of infidelity, you take her to the priest. He gives you a concoction that will basically, I mean, honestly, it probably forced all of them to miscarry, and then the miscarriage was a sign that she was unfaithful, so she'd then be put to death. So even if she was faithful, and drank the bitter waters, chances are, because of the way that patriarchal society was set up, it was something that was going to induce miscarriage more often than not. Maybe not 100% of the time. It's not like the medications we have now, but it still likely, induced miscarriage even in women that were faithful. And that was a way to get out of a marriage that you didn't want, because if your wife was unfaithful, that's not on you, and then you're free as a man to go remarry.
Yeah.
She'll be put to
Convenient,
death.
huh?
Convenient that, these rules were put in place by men.
Yep. Well, Kitty, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I think you have taught us a lot about Wiccan. I certainly had no idea of all the stuff that goes on, and I think it's a great addition to our study of other religions and belief systems. I really appreciate you coming on, and
this was lovely.
I will love to have you back on the channel real soon. I'll have you on for a live
Anytime.
stream, and you'll get to meet the subscribers. They're really nice people, and I will send them all over to you on TikTok and Twitter. And with that being said, thanks everyone for joining us. I'll be back soon with another true crime or dark history video. Keto and Crime out.